welcome to this deep dive
Okay.
into something really, really cool.
Sounds good.
Predicting election results.
All right.
And
Yeah.
we're not just talking about like polls and stuff,
Right.
but using like the power of social networks to really get a glimpse into the future.
Uh-huh.
So get this.
Okay.
Researchers are actually using the structure of our social connections
Oh,
to predict how we vote.
interesting.
Pretty crazy, right?
Yeah, I mean, it makes some sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're going to be looking at some really fascinating research
Okay.
on how things like homophily,
Uh-huh.
which we'll get into,
Right.
and network analysis
Okay.
can actually reveal some surprising insights
Well,
into voter behavior.
Right. I'm excited to dive in.
It is really cool.
Yeah,
It's really fascinating how much our connections can reveal about us.
absolutely.
So think about it.
Okay.
Traditional methods like polls can be pretty flawed, right? They often struggle with getting a truly representative sample.
Right. And,
Yeah.
that can be really problematic.
Yeah, like if a poll only asks people in like big cities,
Right.
it might miss out
Yeah.
on what folks in like rural areas are thinking.
Yeah.
So how do social networks like help solve that problem?
Well, by analyzing the connections between people, we can potentially get a much more complete picture of what the entire electorate is thinking and feeling. It's like having a map of how ideas and opinions flow through a community.
Oh, so it's not just about who you know,
Right.
but who they know too.
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
And this is where something called the them versus us estimator comes in.
Yeah.
This method looks at the ratio of connections you have to people who vote differently from you compared to those who vote the same way.
Wait, so you're telling me that even if we don't know, like everyone's voting intentions, we can still make a good guess about how someone might vote just by looking at their friends.
Essentially, yeah.
That sounds kind of wild.
Might sound counterintuitive, but it really highlights the power of network structure over just individual data points.
Okay.
There was this really interesting study from 2013
All right.
on a referendum in Croatia that showed how people's voting choices were strikingly similar to the choices of their connections, even their friends of friends.
So like if I'm at a party
Right.
and I see two groups kind of naturally forming,
Uh-huh.
I might be able to guess the political leanings of each group just by observing who's talking to whom.
You got it.
Wow.
The structure of our social connections often reflects our shared beliefs and preferences.
Oh, that's pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's really cool stuff.
But how do researchers actually like study these massive complex networks, especially something as big as like social media, it seems like?
Yeah.
A huge amount of data to handle.
It is a lot of data.
Yeah.
That's where something called stochastic Kronecker graphs comes in.
Yeah.
Think of it as like building a virtual election in a computer.
Oh, so they're running experiments in a digital world.
Essentially, yes.
To test their theories about how social connections influence voting.
Exactly.
That's pretty clever.
It's a very useful tool.
So by using these simulated networks, they can test things like the them versus us estimator and see how well it predicts election outcomes.
Exactly.
Under different conditions.
Yeah, that's cool.
It allows them to play around with different scenarios.
Okay.
And see what happens.
Yeah. So what have they found? Is this method actually accurate?
Well, when they tested the them versus us estimator on these simulated networks, they found it was often more accurate than simple polling methods, especially when dealing with those biased samples we talked about earlier.
So even with
limited or maybe even slightly skewed data, this network analysis method can still give us valuable insights into how people might vote.
Exactly. It's all about looking beyond individual data points and seeing the bigger picture, the network of connections that influence our decisions.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It is really fascinating stuff.
Really cool.
Yeah.
So we've been talking about how our social connections can actually give us clues about how people might vote. But is that like the only way to predict elections?
It's definitely a powerful tool. Like you said, it's just one piece of the puzzle.
Right.
Researchers are exploring all sorts of innovative approaches to election prediction.
Like what else is out there?
Well, some researchers are using simulations and machine learning to forecast election results. It's a fascinating approach, especially when dealing with limited historical data.
Simulations?
Yeah.
You mean like creating like hypothetical elections in a computer?
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
They build models that simulate voter behavior based on factors like how satisfied people are with the economy, government services, and even things like ethical conduct and political ideology.
So they're basically creating a digital laboratory where they can tweak different variables and see how those changes might affect the outcome.
You got it.
That's really cool.
It's like running 1,000 different elections in a computer to see how different factors play out. And by generating all this simulated data, they can then use machine learning to train models to recognize patterns and make predictions.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Machine learning. Isn't that like super complicated?
It can be, but at its core, it's about teaching computers to learn from data. In this case, they're feeding the computer all this data from their simulations and teaching it to identify factors that might influence voting decisions.
So they're training a computer to be like a political pundit in a way.
Kinda. And what's really interesting is that researchers have used this approach to predict the outcomes of several presidential elections in South America with pretty impressive accuracy.
Wow, so this isn't just like theoretical. They're actually getting real-world results.
They are.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
What kind of factors did their models find to be most important in influencing how people vote?
They found that things like voter satisfaction with the economy and government services were pretty big predictors.
Okay.
Which makes sense, right?
Yeah.
People tend to vote with their wallets.
Totally.
And their sense of well-being.
Yeah, if things are going well, they're more likely to stick with the status quo.
Right.
What about the influence of, like, political ideology?
Yeah.
Did those simulations take that into account?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
They factored in how much voters agreed or disagreed with the government's political ideology, recognizing that this alignment can play a big role in voting decisions. After all, we tend to gravitate towards candidates who share our values.
Right, so they're really trying to capture the whole picture.
They are.
Not just like the economic side of things.
Yeah.
But how do you even begin to represent something as complex as a real-world election in a computer simulation?
Yeah.
It seems like there are so many nuances and unpredictable factors.
It's definitely a challenge.
Yeah.
To create those simulations, researchers have to rely on things like opinion surveys and contextual information to approximate the values of their parameters.
Yeah.
It's a delicate balancing act.
It's like they're trying to translate the messiness of real-world politics into the language of math and data.
Exactly.
Wow.
They're trying to capture those nuances as best they can, acknowledging that elections aren't just about numbers. They're about the social and political realities on the ground.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It seems like they're going to great lengths to make sure their simulations are as realistic as possible.
As realistic as they can be, given the data that they have.
But at the end of the day, no model is perfect.
Right. No model is perfect.
There are always going to be limitations.
You're absolutely right. Even the most sophisticated model can't predict the future with 100% certainty. There are always going to be unforeseen events, unexpected twists and turns that could throw off even the most carefully crafted predictions.
So it's important to take these predictions with a grain of salt, so to speak.
Exactly.
Okay.
These models can be incredibly helpful and understand the dynamics of an election, but they're not crystal balls.
What kind of limitations are we talking about?
One challenge is getting accurate and reliable input data. Right. Remember, garbage in, garbage out.
Right.
If the data feed in the model is flawed, the predictions are likely to be flawed as well. And then there's the issue of model explainability.
Explainability?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
It's great if a model can make accurate predictions, but it's even better if we understand why it's making those predictions. Some models, especially complex ones like neural networks, can be a bit like black boxes. They spit out an answer but don't really tell you how they got there.
So we might know who's gonna win.
Right.
But not really why they're gonna win.
That's the problem.
Oh.
And that lack of transparency can be a bit unsettling, especially when we're talking about something as important as elections. So there's a real push in the field to develop models that are not only accurate, but also transparent and interpretable.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
We want to be able to trust these models, and that trust comes from understanding how they work.
Right.
So how does all of this relate to the 2024 U.S. presidential election?
Yeah.
Are researchers using these machine learning techniques to predict who's going to win the White House?
You bet they are.
Okay.
And they're not just looking at the overall national picture. They're drilling down into key swing states to see how the race might play out in those crucial battlegrounds.
Okay, now we're getting to the good stuff.
Right.
Tell me more about that research.
Right.
What are they doing and what are they finding?
Well, one study we looked at used a technique called time-based weighting with an exponential decay function to analyze pollen data.
Whoa, hold on.
Yeah.
That sounds like something straight out of a science fiction movie.
I know, right?
What does that even mean?
It's actually not as complicated as it sounds.
Okay.
It basically means that they give more weight to recent polls than older ones.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
The closer we get to Election Day,
Right.
the more likely people are to have made up their minds.
Exactly.
So what other factors are these models considering?
They're looking at things like candidate support, opponent support, third-party support, momentum indicators, incumbency status, and even the presence of Donald Trump as a candidate.
So they're throwing everything but the kitchen sink into these models?
Pretty much.
Are they using those fancy neural networks we talked about earlier?
They actually tested a whole bunch of different models, including linear regression ensemble methods, support vector machines, and yes, even neural networks. They wanted to see which model worked best for each individual state.
So it's like a model showdown.
It is.
Each model gets a chance to prove itself in the political arena.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
What did they find? So is there a clear winner?
It turns out that different models perform best in different states. There was no single model that was a champion across the board.
So it's all about finding the right tool for the job, so to speak.
Right.
What were some of the key takeaways from this research? What did they learn about predicting elections in these swing states?
One of the big findings was that models that included variables like candidate momentum, incumbency status, and third-party support tended to be more accurate, which suggests that it's not enough to just look at who's ahead in the polls at a given moment. You also have to consider how the race is evolving and how different factors might influence the final outcome.
It's like analyzing a horse race. You can't just look at who's in the lead halfway through. You have to factor in things like jockey experience, track conditions, and even the horse's recent performance to make an accurate prediction.
That's a great analogy. And just like in horse racing, there are always going to be surprises in elections. No model can perfectly predict the future, but these models can give us valuable insights into the factors that are likely to shape the outcome.
Okay, so we've talked about social network analysis,
Right.
simulations, and now machine learning.
Yeah.
It seems like researchers are leaving no stone unturned in their quest to predict elections.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
There are so many other fascinating approaches out there, each with its own strengths and limitations.
This is all incredibly interesting.
Yeah.
But let's get back to the 2024 election.
Okay.
What are these models saying about who's going to win? Or do they have any predictions?
Well, based on their analysis of those key swing states, the researchers predict a very tight race with Kamala Harris narrowly edging out Donald Trump.
Wow, that's a nail-biter.
It is.
It sounds like every vote is going to count in this election.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that even in a highly polarized political landscape, a handful of votes in a few key states can make all the difference.
And speaking of polarization,
Right.
we've seen a lot of that in recent years.
We have.
How do these prediction models account for the increase in division within the electorate?
Yeah.
It seems like it would be really tough to capture that complexity in a model.
You're right. It's a complex issue. No model can fully capture all the nuances of political polarization.
Yeah.
But by including factors like ideological alignment, candidate momentum, and third-party support, these models can at least attempt to account for the shift in dynamics of a divided electorate.
So it's about recognizing that the electorate is not one big homogeneous blob,
Right.
but rather a collection of diverse groups with different priorities and perspectives.
Precisely.
Okay.
And as the political landscape continues to evolve, so too must the methods we use to predict election outcomes.
It's a constant game of catch-up, trying to understand how people will vote in an increasingly complex and unpredictable world.
It is.
But hey, that's what makes this whole field so fascinating, right?
Absolutely. It's a constant challenge, but it's also incredibly rewarding to uncover those hidden patterns that shape our political landscape. And who knows what exciting new discoveries await us as we continue to explore this fascinating field.
So we've explored all these different methods for predicting elections.
Right.
From analyzing our social networks to building complex simulations and training computers to recognize patterns.
Yeah.
It's pretty mind-blowing stuff.
It is.
But it also kind of makes you think, if our behavior is so predictable, does that mean we have less free will than we think?
That's a really intriguing question, and one that philosophers and scientists have been grappling with for ages. But maybe it's not about determinism versus free will, but about understanding the complex interplay between our individual choices and the social forces that shape those choices.
So it's not like a black and white issue, but more like a spectrum of influences.
Exactly.
We have choices,
right?
But those choices are influenced by the people and information around us.
Well, exactly.
Right.
Think about it. Our social connections provide us with information, perspectives, and norms that undoubtedly influence how we see the world and make decisions. But ultimately, we still have the agency to choose our own path.
It's like those choose-your-own-adventure books,
right,
where you get to make decisions, but within the framework of the story, you have some control, but the narrative also guides you in certain directions.
I love that analogy.
Thanks.
We're not just passive recipients of information.
Right.
We actively engage with our social networks, filter in and interpret in information through the lens of our own values and beliefs.
So it's a constant back and forth, a dynamic dance between our individual agency and the influences of our social world.
Exactly.
And as our social worlds become increasingly digital, this dance gets even more complex, right?
Absolutely. Which brings up another thought-provoking question. If our online behavior is so predictive of our offline choices, are we leaving behind digital footprints that reveal more about ourselves than we realize?
It's almost as if our digital selves are passed in these long shadows that contain clues about our preferences, our beliefs, even our future actions.
Exactly.
It's a bit unsettling, but also incredibly fascinating.
A very poetic way to put it. And as technology continues to advance, those shadows might become even more detailed and revealing. It's something to think about the next time you like a post or leave a comment online.
It really does make you wonder. In an age of big data and artificial intelligence, is data the new currency? And are social connections the veins through which that data flows?
And understand in that flow of data how it shapes our perceptions, influences our decisions, and ultimately predicts our behavior. That's becoming increasingly important in navigating our complex and interconnected world. It's a journey of discovery, uncovering the hidden patterns that connect us all.
And on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive into the fascinating world of election prediction.
Okay.
It's been quite a journey exploring the different ways researchers are using data and technology to understand how we vote.
Hopefully this has given you some food for thought about the power of social networks, the potential of machine learning, and the ever-evolving interplay between data technology and human behavior.
Be sure to check out the show notes for links to all the research we discuss and other resources to help you dive even deeper into this topic. Until next time, keep those minds curious and those connections strong.